You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
Good morning and welcome to Women Up Radio. Today's guest is Felicity Aston. She's a British polar explorer and was the first woman to ski across Antarctica alone. She's a climate scientist, expedition leader, speaker, author, and also an Eider farmer. So welcome back to the show, Felicity.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
Yes, I've just come down with the cold that's going around the whole country at the minute, but I'm out the other side, so
Wonderful.
I'm feeling good today.
So this is why you have such a wonderful husky voice. It adds character.
Yes.
So, today we're going to talk about women as key players in the global climate solution and life lessons from explorers, which is your new book. Last time that you were on the show, which it's got to be at least 3 years ago, we were talking about women's leadership and courage and endurance, and also being an explorer, and the women's Euro-Arabian North Pole expedition, which was fascinating. And I know you did tell me that there's quite a legacy from that, and it's still going on, it's still growing, things are still happening. So can you tell me a tiny update on that, and then I'll get on to the other questions.
Yes, well, I mean, the biggest legacy from that expedition back in 2018 was the women that took part. They returned from the North Pole as ambassadors for the Arctic, for raising awareness of climate change, and also, role models in their own right in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
So many of them have gone on to do amazing things. I mean, Misbah, who's from Manchester, she's been doing lots and lots of talks with groups of young people, particularly in inner city areas of Manchester, encouraging more young people to get out into the outdoors. And then we have Asma from Qatar, who has just become the first Arab to climb an 8,000 meter peak without oxygen.
Oh, really?
So they are really, doing all sorts of things.
Oh, that's amazing.
Creating this wonderful momentum at the same time.
Yeah.
But then the project itself, I mean, we're currently finishing up the book about the expedition, which has been wonderful to write.
Yeah.
We're all writing about it. So it's been quite a complicated book to write, but wonderful. And then the film as well that we made was supposed to be released in 2020, but of course got delayed like everything else.
You've made a film on it as well.
We made a film. Yes, we had a wonderful filmmaker called Holly Morris that was with us throughout the whole expedition and became part of the expedition family, really. She became part of the fabric of it. And then and two camera women that came along with us on the expedition, and the footage that they took was just phenomenal. So we're all really looking forward to that being released, hopefully by the end of this year.
Oh, that'll be amazing. Where is it going to be released? Do you know what on?
We don't know yet. No, we don't know any details whatsoever. They're keeping it very close to their chest. But I think the idea is that they're going to do a little sort of premiere event in each of the countries that were directly involved in the expedition. So I will most definitely keep you posted.
Thank you. That would be great. So, I mean, I know being an explorer, I mean, obviously to normal people like me, it's wonderful, it's amazing, it's exciting, and it seems to be very glamorous. But obviously it must be incredibly challenging and dangerous and lonely and very scary. So you do it all the time, obviously. So what have you learned from all of your expeditions? What's the sort of the strengths that you've learned, the resilience that you've developed?
Oh, goodness. I mean, they are, I think all experiences that any of us have in our life, change us, give us greater insight, change our perspective. They shape us into who we are. Yeah. And expeditions are sort of really extreme versions of that. So, they've taught me everything, from, sort of leadership and being around other people, to sort of human dynamics and psychology, to compassion, to making decisions, to, all sorts of things. So to pick out one lesson amongst them all is really difficult. But I think probably I would say that what I've learned more than anything else is that human beings are brilliant creatures. And I think too often we focus on the bad side of human nature, on the negatives, at the expense of really appreciating just how fantastic we are. I mean, we are capable of such ingenuity. We are capable of such compassion, such wonderful humanity, and I think we need to talk about that more now, more than ever, now that we are facing, environmental change that threatens our existence on this planet. That can be a very gloomy story. And I think the only way that we can maintain the motivation to really find the solutions that we need to find is to remember that, we can do this. We've done it in various different ways in our collective history. We can do it in our future. We are capable of so much more than I think we often realize.
Yes. Yeah. And so is that partly what inspired you to write your book, Life's Lessons from Explorers? Or what inspired that, and what did you find out about them? And again, I mean, the lessons that we can draw on from them. And as I've told you about 10 times, I'm fascinated by the Viking women that you're mentioning in the book. So can you tell us some more about that?
Yes, well, I mean, in fact, it was a wonderful opportunity. It was the publisher who came to me and said, we want to produce this book that looks at what we can learn from the stories of famous historic explorers. And I jumped at the chance. I thought, this is amazing. And but one of the things that I asked for was, can I choose the explorers? And there was a little bit of negotiation there. They're saying, from a publisher's point of view, you have to have the big hitting names in there. But of course, a lot of the big hitting names were white men. And so I said, well, I need to put in, I need to put in some explorers that even I don't know much about, but who really present the diversity and put some representation in there, because I've had a bit of a background hobby of collecting stories, particularly of female explorers, but female explorers from all different parts of the world, because we've been very Europe centric in the last centuries. We've forgotten that there were amazing explorers that came out of Asia and Africa and all around the world. I know
you talk about Japanese as well, don't you? Japanese women.
Yes. So
fascinating.
The first woman to climb Everest was a Japanese woman whose story is yes, and her story is such a wonderful, uplifting story of passion. She had a passion for the mountains that just ran above everything else. And she had this famous saying, be the nail that sticks out. So her whole message was, if you want to do anything in life, you are going to attract attention. You are going to attract people that are going to give you lots of really good reasons why you're not the person to do it, why you're going to fail. So expect that if you're going to be the nail that sticks out, then people are going to try and hammer you down. But don't let that stop you. And I found that just such a wonderful, and she was still climbing mountains right up to the very end of her life.
Really?
Yes. So, again, a wonderful story that not many people know of, and yet I feel they should.
Yes.
And the Viking women that you mentioned, particularly Gudrida, the far-travelled, she was a young girl from a settler farm in Iceland. And this was in the late 9th century, when Iceland had just been colonized by people coming from the Nordic countries. And then Eric the Red discovered Greenland and set up a colony there. And Gudrida was amongst the first. She was a teenage girl, and she traveled with her father to this new colony. And then the New World was discovered, what we now recognize as North America. And again, she was amongst the first to travel to the New World. And what is interesting about her story is that she wasn't just a sort of wife that was taken along. It's likely that well, it's recorded in the sagas that it was her that was instrumental in persuading her third husband. She was on her third husband,
Sounds like me.
to make this journey. And the ships they travelled on were likely her property, because
really?
in the Viking world, women were allowed to inherit property.
Yeah.
So, she wasn't just a sort of tag along. She was an instrumental and business partner. She was a driving force in this. And so I think, a lot of stories of female explorers over the years have firstly been forgotten and need reviving. But secondly, a lot of the stories have been whitewashed in a way, in that the role of women have been reduced to kind of supporter or tag along, where actually when you look at those stories, you think, well, actually that was a lot more than just a participant. That was a driving force, and so that really interested me.
And did you see many differences between the different explorers and the way that they lived or faced challenges? When you take into account all the different regions of the world that they came from, was there a cultural impact on the way that they faced challenges, the way that they lived, or did exploring transcend everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think because the way the book is written is that each explorer, I wrote about them through the lens of one particular characteristic. So Neil Armstrong, for example, first man to walk on the moon, I talked about his sense of humanity. And again, these stories that you think so well, when you get the opportunity to look at them in detail and through one particular lens, I learned so much that I didn't know about this incredible man. And he was incredible for so much more than just those few steps he took on the surface of the moon. A fascinating life. And all of the explorers that I looked at, there were lots of differences. That's kind of what makes it interesting. For example, attitude to risk. I looked at Amelia Earhart, for example, about her attitude to risk. Which when I started writing about her, I thought, oh my goodness, because famously she didn't make it on her last journey and disappeared and was never seen again. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, well, what can I say about risk when somebody clearly kind of got it wrong? But in fact, looking at her attitude to risk, it was fascinating to look at the things that she wrote and said just before that last journey. She said a lot about, I know that if this goes wrong, everybody around me will be blamed for letting me go on this journey. And she said, and yet the responsibility is mine and mine alone. And I'm taking that responsibility knowingly. And, that really spoke to me about, so often when you're going to do something that is perceived as dangerous, as high risk, you are never personally going into those situations just hoping for the best. They're always built on years and years and years of doing similar things, of working up to that point where you have the confidence to go in and do it. And people often talk about this fine line between adventure and madness, and I think this is perhaps one of those distinguishing features that means you can distinguish between the two. Adventure is often a lifetime of building, of escalation, if you like, whereas madness, I would say, is the sort of rushing in blindly and not really considering what you're putting at risk, what you risk losing. But there was also a level through all these stories of similarity. That spirit of exploration, what I would characterize as the human spirit, actually, that curiosity, that need to know, that drive to understand, that ran through all of these people. And the other thing that I really noticed ran through, because you mentioned about, what can we learn from these explorers? There's all sorts that we can learn from them. But one of the biggest lessons I walked away from was that all of them had that kind of moments of self-doubt, those moments where they considered themselves to be failures. Those moments where they thought they'd got it all wrong. And I think that's so important to recognize, because that's hugely encouraging for someone like me, or for anybody that is setting out to do something that scares you, set out to do something, all of this is relative, whatever it is that scares you, your ambition, your aspiration.
Yeah.
that is difficult for you for whatever reason.
Yeah.
We all have those moments, and I think all too often when we have those moments of self-doubt, of worry and insecurity, we immediately beat ourselves up over that and go, oh my goodness, that means I'm a failure. That means, I shouldn't be feeling like this. Yeah. But actually, when you look at all of these people that we say have achieved greatness, they all went through that exact same process. So I think we all have to know that to expect those things and not to see them necessarily as a sign that we're not a person of greatness. It's just that, everyone has to go through that.
Yeah, accept the ups and downs and the lows and the highs and go through with it. So I think it's fascinating, all of that. Anyway, recently you've been on a sail with Team Umiyak. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
It's a Greenlandic word, and it's the name of the small boats, a bit like a sort of coracle. We call it in the UK, that was used particularly by women in Greenland.
Right.
So that's why we call the team Umiyak. Yeah.
Oh, so I pronounced it vaguely all right. That's good. Okay.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that I'm pronouncing it right either, to be honest. My Greenlandic isn't that perfected.
But anyway, you've been on a sail with Team Umiyak from Iceland to Greenland with a team of female athletes, scientists, explorers, filmmakers, sustainability experts, and transition technology pioneers. And this is to raise the awareness and the need for women to be part of the global climate solution, and also to find out more about it. So what did you discover on the sail?
Well, again, the team were so fantastic. That was my main draw to this expedition.
Yeah.
I was on this yacht with, for example, an expert in sustainable finance. Now, I had no idea about sustainable finance or really the sort of role that banking and business has to play in creating our new green future that we all want to see. So it was amazing to spend some time. And then also with, for example, Karen Dark, who's a Paralympian. She won gold in Rio and in London.
Yeah.
And she's had a lot to do with these sort of transition technologies, as has Sophia Scott, who was the filmmaker on board, but also she and her two sisters run a company that create bags and luggage out of partly out of carbon that's been taken out of the atmosphere and put into a material that feels a bit like plastic. So it's like a plastic replacement. And they've also used this carbon to make ink as well. So the ink, for example, that were on our team jackets was all made out of carbon that's been taken out of the atmosphere. Now,
that's amazing.
Isn't it? It's all absolutely fascinating. And not only that, but, they've set up their business along a new business model that I hope, is very forward. I hope this is what our future is going to look like. They have total transparency in every part of their supply line. So they've been to the factory where their things are made in Indonesia. They've gone home and had dinner with the factory workers. They have seen the conditions in which they work. They have encouraged the factory to put solar panels on its roof so that now it's run off of renewable energy rather than fossil fuels. It's that depth of knowledge of where everything comes from and that level of connectedness. And I think, we talk about globalization being a bad thing, but this was an example of how actually having that level of interconnectedness around the world could actually be a really good thing. It could enable us to, really know where everything comes from and be satisfied that every step of the way is done in the very best way it can be, so that when we're walking around with the things that we wear or the things that we use, we know exactly what impact that has had on not just the planet, the environment, but also the society that we have around the world. So it was fascinating spending time with a team like that, but also going to Greenland, and actually, incidentally, it was a part of Greenland that I first visited 24 years ago.
Oh, really?
On one of my very first ever expeditions. It was my first visit to the Arctic. I was 19 years old on a big youth development.
You were 19 the first time you went?
I was 19.
My God,
and
that's young.
Yes, yeah, and quite honestly, the thought that anything that I had done was nearly quarter of a century ago was a bit of a moment for me. I thought, oh my goodness, that must mean I'm old, right?
Yeah, not yet.
A bit disappointing in that respect, but it was surprising. I mean, what was striking was firstly that the changes that I saw were not a surprise. I know the Arctic to be a place where environmental change is extremely rapid, and so was it
really shocking?
Well, I mean, I expected not to be seeing any snow and ice where there had been snow and ice before, and that kind of proved to be the case. And the channels that we were sailing through, Prince Christiansand, which run behind the very southern tip of Greenland, a point called Cape Farewell. Those channels really have only been navigated in recent years, because before that they were full of ice. Lots of ice being disgorged from the glaciers in the land around it, and also lots of ice being blown up from the sea around the southern tip. But of course, now there isn't as much ice in the sea, and now it's water rather than ice being run into those channels because the ice has melted back so far. And while we were sailing, Greenland had rainfall on the ice sheet, and it had record temperatures on the ice sheet. So, I think we went up there and we were filming lots of pictures of lots of wonderful icebergs and wonderful ice. And I think when you see images like that, it's very easy to get a false sense of reassurance. You think, oh, well, great, it's cold up here, there's loads of ice, everything's all right. And I think it belies the level of change that is just under the surface. And the other thing that struck me was that, we were talking to a lot of communities along the way. And I think has been this tendency for us to say, oh, what can we learn from the local communities? But in fact, you don't need to go to Greenland to see the effects of climate change anymore. You can talk to people on my own doorstep, and they're experiencing the effect of climate change. The flooding that happened in the UK this summer, the unseasonal weather, we're all experiencing it. And so what the people in Greenland were telling us is exactly what someone on my doorstep in Sevenoaks might also say, and so that was really striking, that this position that climate change is a global issue that can't be solved by any one person or any one political group or body, or it's becoming so evident that this idea of, because the other thing is that in Greenland they're experiencing all of this, and yet they have contributed very little to the problem, and yet they are experiencing and so against that backdrop, the idea of sovereignty, of who owns the land, when we now know that the planet is so interconnected. When you look at, for example, the burning of the rainforests, what right does one country have to impact so disastrously on something that affects the entire globe and the well-being and existence of a group of people on the other side of the planet? It was an extremely interesting journey that threw up a lot of new perspectives that I hope we're able to communicate well in the film that will result from it.
And I know, I mean, you were all women, and I mean, I don't want to try and make climate feminist against men, etc., but what can women do particularly? Because I know you were saying that you need more women, you need the capability of women to really be part of the global climate solution. So what can we do? Can we do anything differently, or do we have a different vision? How can women really move forward on this and help more with this?
Well, I don't think it's actually down to women so much. I think it's, down to society collectively to make sure that women and all, that there is proper representation in the decisions that we're making.
Yes.
I would really like to say to all the policymakers and politicians and, people who are making change, to make them all just think, if they are sitting in a room where everybody looks like them, then they don't have representation in those decisions that they're making, and therefore they're likely not to work as solutions. We've seen over and over again that the only time that you can make real change is when you have all the stakeholders really feeling ownership of that change and ownership of those measures that you're taking. So to be a group of Western white men in a room making decisions about what's going to happen across the globe in the future, we've seen time and time again that does not work.
Exactly.
So you have to have representation, not just sufficient numbers of women in the room, but let's talk to the people that actually live in the places that you are discussing. Make sure they are fully involved in the conversation. We've talked about having scientists involved in the conversation, and I think that's now a sort of well-established technique. But you also need, cultural leaders in the room. You need religious leaders in the room. You need all the different aspects of what make up, society and civilization today on the planet to be part of the conversation. Because if they're not part of the conversation, they're not going to be part of the solution.
And what do you see happening with that? Because, for example, COP26 is happening in 2 weeks, I think, or through at the end of the month, for climate change, etc., in Glasgow. Do you think much progress is made in these types of big meetings, or is it something that's a step in the right direction, but just not going to enough depth and not having enough unity on really trying to do something coherent?
It's difficult because, I'm sort of positive and negative about it in the same time. At the same time, my own personal opinion is that individual action can only go so far. Really in the scale of time, the speed with which we need change to happen right now, I feel that probably that can only be affected by these sort of dry political channels. It needs to be government laying down regulations that will make different industries change. The food industry, the energy industry. I kind of think that, consumer action can only go so far. If all of us turn off our lights and don't use plastic straws anymore, that's all great, but it can only take us so far. There's a level where, it has to come from the top down, particularly with the big industrial changes that we need. That can really only come from government. And so, at the same time as I suspect that perhaps much won't be achieved, I'm also desperate for things like COP26 to do what we need them to do and really kind of change the pace at which change is happening and provide that political will that is key to everything. Once we've really got that sense of urgency, that will be the critical difference. We saw that with COVID, for example. It suddenly became a priority and we made the changes that we needed to make. Now we just need to see what's happening in the environment and with climate as a similar priority. And then, hopefully we'll get that sense of urgency that will transform our response. But, I really, really, really hope, although I'm worried it's a vain hope, I really hope that when we see those pictures on the news of COP26 at the end of the month, we won't just be seeing suited men, white men, walking into those meetings, that we'll be seeing representatives from all sorts of elements of our society and true representation. But as I say, I wonder if my hopes will be realised. I suspect sadly not.
Well, we will cross our fingers for that one. So, but I know a few women that are going there speaking and things like that. So I think that's a good sign. I'm like you. I have a suspicion that it is going to be mostly suited white males, and not as many of everyone else that should be there. But I think it's improved slightly. But how do you see the future? Do you think, I mean, particularly over the next decade, and particularly relating to climate and ecology, have you any ideas, any feelings about what's going to happen?
You mean in terms of climate trends?
Yes.
Well, I mean, sadly, it's there for everyone to see. It's funny. I first went to Antarctica in the year 2000 as a meteorologist. I was posted to a research station in Antarctica working for the British Antarctic Survey, and I was monitoring climate and ozone. So I just completed a master's where my dissertation had been about climate change in the Antarctic Peninsula. And so I was kind of aware of the latest that was happening in paleoclimatology and that sort of climate change area. And the predictions that were being made then are exactly what we're seeing now. It was being predicted that in 20 or so years' time, we would start to see more extreme weather events, and that those events would be more extreme, and that we would lose seasonality. There'd be a lot more variability in weather patterns. So all those predictions were out there, and now I'm sitting here 20 years later and it's all seeing the realization of all of those predictions. So then that knowledge kind of makes you pay closer attention to what is being said now about the next 20 years. And that's what really makes me stay awake at night, is because what is being predicted is a pretty awful set of circumstances. The earliest predictions of an ice-free summer Arctic Ocean are 2025.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, that there's a whole debate out there about whether that is, an exaggeration or not, or what the reality will be. But, those are the kind of timescales that we're talking about. And then you move further down and they talk about this critical tipping point. Where the climate sort of goes into this cascade effect where nothing will be able to stop it. And that really is so you have things like the collapse of the big ice sheets. We have two big ice sheets in Antarctica and the ice sheet on the Greenland ice cap. And so when those ice sheets disintegrate, that's when we have a huge amount of ice suddenly being dumped into the oceans. That's all fresh water, so that could disrupt currents that we rely on for different climate patterns. Also huge sea level rise, and suddenly you're looking at a planet that looks very different to the one we live in today. And so, that's all pretty doom and gloom. And I think, that's where we have to start injecting some hope. Otherwise, we risk losing that engagement we risk losing the focus on creating a solution, on creating a better future, of averting that disaster. And and I do have reasons for hope. I think this sense of urgency, we are on the cusp maybe of getting that kind of critical mass where politicians in particular have to do something about it. And as well as turning off our lights and doing our recycling, I think one of the biggest things that we can do is perhaps speak through our votes. I don't wish to come across as a campaigner, but in my personal opinion, I'm coming to the point where really we have to vote for politicians that are going to actually take climate seriously and put it in its proper place of priority above everything else, because they might they have to start seeing themselves as wartime leaders, rather than this being a war against other human beings, that this is a kind of wartime mentality against the pollution that and the impact that negative impact that we've been having on the planet.
And is there anything else that we can do actively to support this or to help this? I mean, I normally ask, is there any final piece of wisdom or strategy that we should keep in mind? Is there anything that you recommend we do to try and get this more awareness, more action happening towards this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just being, it's funny, I talk about this in life lessons, actually, from one of the lessons I took away from Gudrida, the far traveller, the Viking woman that discovered the New World. She was considered extremely wise. And in Viking times, wisdom came about through self-sufficiency. If you knew every aspect of the world around you and of your life, then you were considered extremely wise. And I thought, my goodness, that is still valid today. Someone who knows exactly where their electricity comes from, exactly, who supplies their Wi-Fi, that knows, the bank that they deal with, is that bank also dealing arms in another part of the country or subsidizing fossil fuels, or, just knowing the mechanics of your own life and being truly aware of what it is you're supporting and what it is you're not supporting, I think, has a really powerful part to play. It's not just about embargoing things that we see as harmful. It's about supporting companies that are taking those steps to do the right thing and to create the future that we want. And, there's another wonderful woman I wrote about called Sylvia Earle, who's an amazing ocean scientist. An ocean advocate. And she says, if you needed to choose a time to be alive, I would choose now, because, now is when we've got the opportunity to really create a better future. We're at a real kind of turning point in human history, and it's a really exciting time to be alive. So I think if we all took on that mentality of, wow, we have the power today to really impact the future. So let's grasp that and do the most that we can with it.
What a wonderful piece of advice. That's so true. Thank you very much, Felicity. I appreciate everything that you've said. I appreciate you coming on the show again and spending your time. I hope it hasn't killed your throat too much. So, everybody, you've been listening to Felicity Aston talking about life's explorers and also about climate change and the climate solution. Thanks, Felicity. Take care and see you again soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.